In an age where a woman's worth was measured by the sons she could bear, one woman was deemed worthless, cast out by her own blood, traded like livestock to a feared Apache warrior just to settle a land dispute. Isabel Thorne was a ghost walking in the sun, her spirit as barren as her womb was said to be. Her father called her a curse, her church called her a failure. But the warrior Kyle saw something else in the haunted blue of her eyes. This isn't just a story of the West. It's a story of how the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound miracles, and how a woman left for dead became the mother of a legend. The wind in the Arizona territory had a voice. It was seldom a kind one. It scraped across the hard pan, carrying grit that stung the eyes and a loneliness that settled deep in the bones. For Isabel Thorne, that wind was a constant companion, a physical reminder of the emptiness that had defined her entire life. Her day began before the sun, with the familiar ache in her back and the cold of the floorboards on her bare feet. Her life was a list of chores: kneading dough, churning butter, mending clothes by the weak light of a tallow candle. Her fingers were deft and sure, even if the rest of her was deemed faulty. She had been married once, briefly, to a farmer named Thomas Miller. The union had dissolved in whispers and shame. After 2 years with no sign of a child, Thomas had sought an annulment. The pastor proclaimed Isabel's womb a barren field, cursed by the Almighty. The shame followed her home like a stray dog. Her father, Hezekiah Thorne, was a man carved from the same unforgiving land. His faith was as hard and unyielding as the rock-strewn soil. He saw Isabel's return not as a daughter seeking refuge, but as a divine judgment upon his house. Her presence was a constant, silent sermon on failure. "An idle womb is the devil's workshop," he would declare at the dinner table. His eyes never quite met hers. The tension on the Thorne homestead was a living thing, made worse by the world outside its fences. Their land sat on the edge of what the settlers called civilization, and what the Chiricahua Apache called their ancestral home. A fragile truce held the two sides at bay, but it was a truce frayed by suspicion and greed. The leader of the local Apache band was a warrior named Kyle, a man spoken of in hushed, fearful tones around settlement campfires, a phantom of the canyons. He was said to be a widower, his own wife and child lost to the coughing sickness 2 winters prior. One sweltering afternoon, as Isabel was drawing water from the well, she saw them, 3 riders, materializing from the shimmering heat. They were not settlers. They were Apache. The man in the lead had shoulders as broad as an axe handle and hair as black as a raven's wing. He carried no rifle, only a bow and a quiver of arrows, but he radiated an authority that needed no gunpowder to announce itself. This, she knew, was Kyle. Her father emerged from the cabin, his own rifle held loosely at his side. He walked to the fence line. The conversation that followed was a strange mix of halting English and Apache words, punctuated by long, heavy silences. Isabel couldn't hear the words, but she could read her father's body, the stiff set of his shoulders, the way he gestured first toward his land, then back toward the cabin, toward her. A cold dread slithered down her spine. This was more than a parley about a stray cow. This was a negotiation. After an eternity, Kyle nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He looked past Hezekiah, his dark, unreadable eyes landing on Isabel by the well. He held her gaze for a single, searing moment. It was not a look of pity, it was assessment. It was as if he was seeing not a barren woman, but a piece in a game whose rules she did not understand. Then the riders turned and melted back into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. That evening, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken words. "Father," Isabel finally asked, her voice barely a whisper, "what did they want?" Hezekiah closed his Bible with a heavy thud. "Peace," he said. "They want a lasting peace. No more raids. No more stolen cattle." Isabel felt a flicker of relief. "And what did you give them in return?" Her father's gaze did not waver. The savage respects strength and sacrifice. They see a bond of blood as the only one that cannot be broken. The cold dread from the afternoon returned, turning her blood to ice. "The warrior Kyle," Hezekiah continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He is a leader without a wife, without a family to continue his line. An alliance requires a tether, a wife from our people to live among them. Isabel's mind reeled. She thought of the other families in the settlement, families with daughters, rosy-cheeked, fertile girls. Who? She breathed, the word catching in her throat. No other family would bear the shame. Hezekiah cut her off. No man would give up a daughter who can produce sons. But we are different. We have a daughter who cannot. The word struck Isabel with the force of a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. He wasn't just talking about her. He was offering her. You, you can't, she stammered, looking wildly at her mother, who refused to meet her gaze, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It is done, Hezekiah said, his voice ringing with the terrible finality of a nail being hammered into a coffin. You are a blight upon this house. But here, you can finally have a purpose. Your barrenness can be the price of peace. You will go with him at sunrise. He saw her not as a daughter, but as a fallow field to be bartered away. A useless thing finally made useful. She was being given to the wilderness, to a man her people considered a savage. All because the one thing she was created to do, she could not. The sunrise was a cruel mockery, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of rose and gold. It was a beautiful dawn for the end of her world. When Kyle arrived, he was alone. He did not knock. He simply stood at the door, a tall, imposing silhouette against the rising sun. Hezekiah met him, pushing Isabel forward as if she were livestock being presented at market. She is ready, he grunted. Kyle's dark eyes met Isabel's. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Without a word, he held out the reins of a spare horse. Isabel took them, her hands trembling. She took one last look at the only home she had ever known, at her mother who had already retreated into the shadows. Then she turned her back on it all. The journey was silent. Kyle rode ahead, leading her into a labyrinth of canyons, an alien world of towering red rock. The sun beat down. The silence was vast, broken only by the clop of hooves. Every story she had ever heard about the Apache played on a loop in her head. Tales of savagery, torture, heathen rituals. She expected brutality, a rough hand, a cruel command, but none came. He simply rode on, occasionally glancing back, his expression unreadable. Late in the afternoon, they arrived at his camp. It was a collection of dome-shaped wickiups nestled in a well-protected canyon. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine. Children stopped their play to stare. Women paused their work to watch her arrival, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. Kyle led her to a wickiup slightly larger than the others. "This is my home," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You will stay here." An older woman, Nalan, approached. Her face was a beautiful, wrinkled map, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Kyle spoke to her in Apache, and her eyes never left Isabel. Then Nalan offered Isabel a gourd of water. It was a small mercy in a sea of terror. "You eat, you rest," Nalan said in broken English, pointing to a pile of soft furs in a corner. Isabel was a ghost in this new world. The Apache people largely ignored her. Kyle was a distant figure, leaving before she woke, returning after dusk. He never touched her. He never made a move toward the furs where she slept. He treated her less like a wife and more like a skittish animal he was waiting to see if it would bolt. The lack of aggression was its own form of torment. Her imagination filled the void with terrible possibilities. One evening, desperate to break the suffocating silence, she spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why me? My father. He told you I was barren." Kyle stopped cleaning an arrow shaft. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like he was peeling back the layers of her soul. "Your father sees only what is missing," he said, his English slow and deliberate. "He looks at a field and sees no corn, so he calls it worthless. He does not see the soil, the water, the sun. He does not see what could be." He set the arrow aside. "My people need peace. Your people need peace. Sometimes to grow something new, you must plant a seed in a place no one else thinks to look." He offered no further explanation. He returned to his work, leaving Isabel to grapple with his words. He hadn't denied her barrenness. He had reframed it, not as an ending, but as a different kind of beginning. For the first time since she had been cast out, a tiny seed of something other than terror began to stir within her. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was a flicker of profound, bewildering curiosity about the man who saw a potential harvest in a fallow field. The days bled into weeks, and Isabel learned that survival was not about speaking, but about watching. Nalan, the old woman, became her reluctant tutor, teaching her, through gestures, how to pound yucca root into fiber, into how to burn the spines off prickly pear to harvest the fruit. Isabel was a clumsy apprentice. Her hands, accustomed to dough and thread, struggled with sinew and flint, but she persisted. Each small success was a tiny victory, a single stone laid in the foundation of a new life. Her relationship with Kyle remained a landscape of vast, unspoken distances. They shared a home, but not a life. The space between their sleeping firs felt as wide as a canyon. Yet she began to see the man, not just the warrior. She saw the way the children of the village flocked to him, how he would lift them onto his shoulders, a rare, gentle smile on his lips. One afternoon, while foraging with Nalan, Isabel's foot slipped. She cried out as she tumbled, her ankle twisting painfully. She could not walk. Nalan returned an hour later with Kyle. He knelt beside her, his examination swift and professional. His touch was firm, but surprisingly gentle. "It is not broken," he announced, "but badly sprained." Without another word he turned, presenting his back to her. "Come," he commanded. Mortified, Isabel hesitated, but the pain in her ankle was a fierce, throbbing counter-argument. Awkwardly, she wrapped her arms around his neck, and he stood with an easy strength, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. The journey back was both excruciating and strangely intimate. Pressed against his back, she could feel the rhythm of his breathing, smell the scent of pine and dust and sweat that clung to him. For the first time, she felt not like a prisoner, but like something being protected. That night, as she lay with her throbbing ankle propped on a pile of furs, he brought her a bowl of stew. He sat near her, watching as she ate. "You are learning," he said, breaking the long silence. Isabel looked up, surprised. "I am clumsy." The children laughed. "A tree does not grow strong in a single season," he replied. "You do not run from the work. You do not cry out for the home you lost. Your hands are soft, but your spirit is not. This is what I saw by the well." His words stunned her. He had seen strength where everyone else, including herself, had only ever seen failure. That night, the space between their sleeping firs seemed to shrink just a little. Meanwhile, back at the settlement, Isabel's existence had become a dark and twisted legend. A rancher named Bartholomew Finch, a man with a greedy eye on her father's land, fanned the flames of fear. "Hezekiah Thorne sold his own daughter to a heathen savage," Finch would thunder at the saloon. "Gave Christian flesh to a godless brute to save his own hide. What's to stop them from wanting our daughters next?" He played on the settlers' deepest fears, painting Isabel as a willing captive, a woman who had gone native, a contagion that threatened them all. The storm Finch was brewing was still distant, but its clouds were gathering, dark and menacing on the horizon. And Isabel had no idea her quiet battle for survival was about to become the catalyst for war. The fierce heat of summer softened into a golden, mellow autumn. Isabel's ankle healed. She moved with more confidence, her body hardened by labor, her skin tanned by the sun. Then a new and terrifying strangeness began within her own body. A wave of nausea in the mornings, a profound weariness that settled into her bones. Then she missed her monthly courses. One moon passed, then another. The idea that took root in her mind was so impossible, so contrary to every label ever branded upon her, that she couldn't dare to give it voice. Barren, cursed, a fallow field. It couldn't be. She and Kyle still lived as strangers. He had never once approached her as a husband. And yet, her dresses felt tighter. A strange fluttering, like the beating of a captured bird's wings, had begun deep within her belly. If she was pregnant, how was it possible? Her mind flew back through the months. She remembered nights when Kyle had returned late, nights he drank tiswin, a mild fermented drink. On a few of those nights, she recalled waking from a deep sleep, her body feeling heavy and strange, with a vague, dreamlike memory of his weight beside her. She had dismissed it as a dream. But now, was it possible he had come to her in the night, silently, while she slept? One afternoon, while grinding mesquite beans with Nalin, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Nalin stopped her work, her sharp eyes narrowing. She looked from Isabel's pale face to the slight swell of her stomach. Without asking, Nalin placed a dry, wrinkled hand flat against her abdomen. Her touch was firm, knowing. "One," Nalin said softly, tapping one finger on Isabel's belly. Isabel's heart sank. She had been wrong. But then Nalin shook her head, a small, wry smile on her lips. She tapped two fingers, side by side. "Two!" Isabel's eyes widened. Nalin pressed her hand once more against her expression thoughtful. Then she slowly held up three fingers. "Three," she whispered. "This is the work of the spirits." Isabel stared, uncomprehending. "More than one?" The idea was so outlandish, she felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat. From barren to this. It was impossible. That evening, when Kyle returned, Nalin was waiting for him. They spoke for a long time in their own language. When Kyle finally entered the wiki up, the air crackled with a new tension. "Nalin says you carry a child," he said, his voice rough. Isabel could only nod. "She says the spirits have blessed your womb beyond measure," he continued, taking a step closer. He knelt before her, his large, calloused hand hovering before gently resting on her belly. His touch sent a jolt of heat and connection through her. At that moment, she felt it again, the distinct, undeniable flutter of life beneath his palm. Kyle's eyes shot up to meet hers, his stoic mask gone, replaced by a look of pure wonder. "It is true," he breathed. The news transformed him. The distance he had so carefully maintained dissolved. He began to treat her with a fierce, tender protectiveness. He told her stories of his people, of the coyote trickster and the creation of the stars. He was not just securing an heir, he was protecting a sacred event. For Isabel, the discovery was a cataclysmic shift in her identity. She was no longer the barren daughter. She was becoming a mother. But this miracle, nurtured in the secret heart of the Apache Canyon, was also a profound danger. A secret this large could not be contained forever. And when the whispers of life reached the settlement, they would not be heard as a blessing, but as a monstrous perversion of nature. The perfect fuel for the fire of hatred Barty Finch was so eager to ignite. News travels in the wilderness through whispers. The rumor of Isabel's condition reached the settlement not as a joyful announcement, but as a dark, corrupted fable. By the time Barty Finch got hold of the tale, it had become a grotesque piece of horror. "She's breeding for him," Finch bellowed, slamming his fist on the bar. "That Thorne girl ain't barren at all. She's whelping a litter of half-breed savages. An abomination." He twisted the news into a weapon. Isabel's pregnancy was not a miracle. It was a diabolical plot. "They're mixing their blood with ours. First they take a woman, then they'll take our land with their half-savage spawn as their claim." The fragile peace Hezekiah had purchased with his daughter's life crumbled into dust. The news inevitably reached Hezekiah, delivered by the pastor himself. "Hezekiah," the Reverend began, his tone heavy with judgment, "they are saying your daughter Isabel is with child." Hezekiah went still. All these months he had lived with the cold comfort that his sacrifice had been necessary because Isabel was fundamentally flawed. Her barrenness was the cornerstone of his justification. "It is a lie," Hezekiah growled. "The girl is barren. I told the Apache she was barren." "Barty Finch's men say they have it from the Apache themselves," the Reverend pressed. "Hezekiah, if this is true, you have willfully given a blessed vessel to a heathen." The accusation struck Hezekiah like a physical blow. The possibility that Isabel was not barren meant his monstrous act was built on a lie. But was it his lie or hers? Had she deceived him all along? His guilt curdled into a new potent fury, directed at Isabel. In the Apache camp, the atmosphere had also changed. Isabel was no longer just Kyle's wife. She was a vessel of the spirit's favor. The other women, once suspicious, now treated her with reverence. Kyle, however, understood the danger. His scouts brought him news of the anger in the settlement, of the armed patrols. He knew that what his people saw as a blessing, the white men would see as a threat. The miracle growing inside Isabel's womb had made her a target. It had made them all targets. The camp's defenses were quietly strengthened. Warriors sharpened their arrows and cleaned their rifles. There was no panic, only a grim, quiet readiness. One evening, as Isabel sat stitching a small garment, Kyle came to sit beside her. "You are not afraid," he stated, more than asked. Isabel placed a hand on her rounded belly. "I have been afraid my whole life," she admitted. "This is different. This is a fear that sharpens the senses, like a mother wolf guarding her den." She looked at him, her blue eyes clear and steady. "I will not let them harm our children." The word hung in the air between them. Or, it was the first time she had said it. It sealed the final brick in the bridge between their two worlds. Kyle reached out and took her hand. "And I will not let them harm you," he vowed. The wind picked up, whistling down the canyon walls. It was the same wind that had once mocked Isabel's emptiness, but now it sounded like a warning. The first snows of winter had just begun to dust the highest peaks when Isabel's labor began. It was a fierce, gripping pain that stole her breath. Nalin and two other midwives rushed her into the wickiup. The air grew thick with the steam from boiled herbs and the low chanting of prayers. Outside, Kyle stood by the fire, his face an unreadable mask, but his hands betrayed his anxiety. The entire camp was on alert. Scouts had reported that Barty Finch and a mob of armed settlers had left the settlement, riding hard for the canyon. They were coming to eradicate what Finch had called the nest of abominations. Isabel's labor was a brutal ordeal. As dusk settled, the first cry, a thin, reedy wail, pierced the air. Nalin held up a small, perfect baby boy. A wave of profound, overwhelming love washed through Isabel. But it was not over. Another wave of contraction seized her. Nalin's eyes widened. Her prophecy had been true. Minutes later, a second child was born, another boy. The women murmured in awe. Twins were a powerful sign, but as Nalin placed the second baby beside his brother, she looked at Isabel's still swollen belly in utter disbelief. "Spirits of the mountain," she breathed in her own tongue. "There is another." Isabel gathered the last of her strength. A primal roar tore from her throat as she gave one final, monumental push. Silence. Then the soft, delicate cry of the third child. A tiny, beautiful girl. Triplets. The barren woman had brought forth a bounty that defied all logic. She had done the impossible. At that exact moment, a gunshot echoed from the mouth of the canyon. The attack had begun. Finch's mob charged into the rancheria. They expected a timid, disorganized people. They found a silent, disciplined line of Apache warriors, led by Kyle, materializing from the shadows. The battle was swift and brutal. Back at the Thorne homestead, Hezekiah was in turmoil. A boy had ridden to warn him. "They're going to kill them all, Mr. Thorne. They're talking about your daughter. And the babies." "Babies!" The word struck Hezekiah with the force of a physical blow. His anger, his shame, all of it was dwarfed by a primal, protective instinct he thought he had buried. His grandchildren were in mortal danger. His harsh faith stripped away, leaving only the raw truth of a father. He had cast his daughter out. He could not let her be consumed by the fire he had helped to light. With a cry of anguish, Hezekiah grabbed his heavy hunting rifle. "Stay inside and bar the door," he commanded his wife. He saddled his horse and galloped toward the canyon, riding not to join the mob, but to stand against it. He arrived as the battle raged. He saw Barty Finch, his face a mask of hate, reloading to storm the large wickiup from which the cries of newborns could now be faintly heard. Hezekiah didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot struck the rifle from another settler's hands who was aiming at Kyle. "Finch!" Hezekiah roared. "Get away from there! This is not the Lord's work. This is the devil's." Finch spun around, his face contorted with shock. "Thorne, you damn traitor, siding with the savages that defiled your own blood." "She is my blood," Hezekiah yelled back, "and those are my grandchildren in there. You will not harm them." His sudden defense of his daughter threw the attackers into confusion. The momentum of their attack faltered. It was the opening Kyle needed. He let out a sharp war cry, and his warriors pressed their advantage, forcing the disorganized mob back. Finch, realizing the fight was lost, turned to flee. But Kyle was on him in an instant. A brief, desperate struggle, and Finch lay still. The battle was over. Hezekiah stood alone, his shoulders slumped. He had defended the family he had thrown away. Slowly Kyle approached him, his knife still in his hand. The two men, the father who had given her away, and the husband who had taken her in, stood facing each other in the firelight. Nalin emerged from the wickiup and gestured for them to come inside. Hezekiah entered the small dwelling. The air was warm, smelling of herbs and blood and life. And there on a bed of soft furs was Isabel. She looked exhausted, transcendent, her eyes shining with a fierce protective light. In her arms and nestled beside her were three tiny perfect babies. She looked up and saw her father. Her expression was not one of hatred or forgiveness. It was the calm, steady gaze of a woman who had passed through fire and come out unbreakable. Hezekiah's harsh facade finally crumbled. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at the daughter he had called barren and the three miracles she held in her arms. He had come expecting a reckoning of violence and hate. He had found himself in the presence of a staggering, beautiful creation. It was a mother's reckoning, and it had redeemed them all. The silence that fell over the canyon after the attack was profound. Hezekiah Thorne remained by the fire, a man adrift between two worlds, grappling with the consequences of his actions. Inside the wickiup, Isabel was cocooned in a world that consisted only of the warmth of her children. Kyle sat beside her, a silent guardian. "They need names?" Isabel whispered. Kyle's face softened. "The firstborn will be Yonan, for the bear's strength. The second, Taza, for the falcon's sharp sight." He gazed at his tiny daughter. "And she will be Dosha, the owl, for the wisdom to bridge our two worlds." Yonan, Taza, and Dosha, bear, falcon, and owl. The names felt right. Later, Hezekiah approached the entrance, hat in hand. "Isabel," he said, his voice raspy, "I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What I did, it was a sin born of pride." Isabel looked at the broken man who was her father. "There is nothing to forgive," she said calmly. "You did what you thought you must, and it brought me here. It gave me them. My life didn't end when you sent me away, Father. It began." Her absolution was a heavier burden than any curse. He nodded, unable to speak, and left the camp an hour later, riding east in search of a new life, having finally understood the value of the one he had discarded. The story of the battle and the birth spread. A new grudging respect for Kyle's people grew, and the peace paid for in blood held firm. The triplets thrived, a living legend. They grew into a perfect fusion of their parents. Kyle's resilience and Isabel's unshakable spirit. Isabel blossomed into a respected figure, a healer and a wise woman. She was no longer a bridge between two worlds, but the foundation of a new one. Years later, she stood with Kyle on a high mesa, their three tall, strong children beside them. She was not Isabel Thorne, the barren daughter, or Isabel Miller, the failed wife. She was Isabel, wife of Kyle, mother of Yonan, Tasa, and Dosha. She had been given to a warrior for being worthless, but he had seen the fertile soil hidden beneath the stones. Together, they had cultivated a legacy more bountiful than either could have ever dreamed. The story of Isabel and Kyle is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in the fires of our deepest wounds. It shows us that true family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the love you fight for, and that miracles can blossom in the most unexpected and unforgiving of landscapes. If this story of resilience, love, and redemption touched your heart, please help us share it with the world by hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the pages of history. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell us your favorite part of Isabel's journey. Until next time, stay curious.